Hi guys, and welcome to the real-time coloring version of the Christmas fairy. She's called Fairy Twinkles and she is by Make It Crafty. This is a adorable little fairy and I've colored her up multiple times. When I started coloring these fairies, I always had a rough time because I didn't know what color schemes I would use, because I got all overwhelmed with all of the different details and wanting to pick different colors for different parts. I must say though that I really like this version, which is so soft and doesn't really have a pop of color in it more than the green, but it's still very soft, so she feels very light and like a fairy. So I am doing this with my favorite winter skin color, which is E000, E00, E21, E11 and E04. And the first thing I've done is to map out where I want the shadings to be with the E000. I'm using the E000 because I will definitely color over it, and therefore if I then realize when doing this very light shading that I don't really feel that it would fit at that place, I can just color over it and no one will be the wiser. So that is a tip from me when it comes to kind of figuring out where the shadows is going to be. And then after I've done that, I'm going in with my E04, and some places like this you hardly can see the nib of my pen, and the reason is that I'm trying to keep the pen almost vertically straight up because I get the finest lines when I do that. Then I'm very light on my hand and just coloring carefully in every place where I want to have a little bit of shadow on her ear, around her cheeks, underneath her hair, under her hands, and then also on her legs, because I decided that she should have bare legs. She's a fairy. Yeah, she's a Christmas fairy, but she's a fairy. And it's summer in like Australia. So that is how I kind of figure out where I want those shadows. When it comes to my E11, I'm now going to have to work in two different ways towards the E04, where I have rounded shadows like underneath her face, like around her face, up at the wrinkle above her eye, and those places. I need to elongate the shadows. I need to pull them out, while the shadows that is underneath her hair, for example, which is a cast shadow, I don't want to pull it out. I just want to color over it, and I color over it to kind of tone that blue tone down a little bit, because the E04 is very stark, and if you don't color over it, it will kind of pop really hard. So you want to kind of always, even when you do cast shadows, if you're using this specific color scheme, try to always color over it a little bit with the next to lightest, which is the E11, to get it a little bit more balanced. So when my E11 is done, I'm going in with the E21, and again I'm working on elongated everything where I colored with the E11, except for those cast shadows from the hair and such that I just colored in. Those I want to keep having stark and dark. It's even that you can actually go in and take those cast shadows and apply them on top again with, for example, the E11, if you feel that they disappear in your blending, because you will go over with the lighter colors later on. Then I'm taking my E000 again. I'm elongating those E21, trying to get them out, trying to get the roundness of her nose, which I'm going in there, done there. And then also I'm adding a little shadow just between her eyes, because we do have a little bump there, cute little bump, just where our eyes kind of in the middle of our eyes. So I'm trying to add that little bump in to give even more dimension to her face, so that she's not so manga-ish flat. I'm taking a manga character and making more of a illustrated character out of, sort of, because manga is usually very simple and flat coloring. And the reason for doing easy and flat coloring when it comes to manga is because manga usually gets animated, and animation, then you want to have relatively simple lines and simple coloring, because then it's much easier to animate. That's something I have learned the past few weeks. Then we have the cheeks, which is the R30 and R32, where I start with the R30 where it's darkest, and then I pull it out with the help of the R30, so it comes all over her cheeks and she gets those really rosy Christmas or winter cheeks. Then we're going in for the hair, and again I'm taking the lightest color, in this case E40, and I kind of just mapping out where I want the shadowing to be, to figure out how much I want and how much I need. This is also where I kind of decided that I didn't want her to be platinum blonde, because I wanted her hair to have a little bit more strength in it. And I went in with coloring in her ears and her eyes also, because I noticed that I have forgotten those parts. I was considering going for the whole iris also, but nah, just continue with the hair instead. So I'm going in with the E41, and kind of in this place I kind of just adding the shadows. They can go longer or shorter than the E40, because that is the lightest color and will be covering the whole hair in the end. Then I'm going in with the E42, and this is often the only color scheme I do this with. Usually I go in with the lightest, and then I go from dark to light, and there I went in and kind of tried to remove a little dot of brown that I got on her cheek. But with most, like with skin, with her clothing, I work first with the lightest to block it out if I feel I need to block the shadows out. Sometimes I don't feel I need it, then I just go in with the darkest directly. Then I go from dark to light, because you always want to blend out the darker pen with a lighter pen. And therefore, if you start with the light, then you go to the dark, then you will want to go back to the light again, and therefore you will build up the light and get a darker result than if you only have one layer. So that's one of the reasons why I go from dark to light. The other reason is that I'm lazy, and I don't always have the patience to go with several different layers. And by going from dark to light, I don't have to if I don't want to. Sometimes I do want to, because it do build up the color, and because it builds up the color, you get another kind of depth. And this is why I love my hair, because I always go from light to dark, from dark to light, or almost always. I shouldn't say always, but most of the time. A tip when working with hair, something that I just recently learned, and that is, if you want the strands to be more visual, you don't want to go with the dark colors all the way out to the edge. Instead, you kind of leave white barriers around, or not white, lighter barriers around it, and then so that when you then go in with your next to darkest color, you will A, elongate your shadows, and B, try to keep a little bit of that light border left. And for every lighter color you go in with, you will kind of make that border a little bit smaller, but you will keep it there. And therefore you will have more of strands in your hair. And it kind of will look a little bit more realistic. If you look at a picture of a person with hair, especially like photographs of models because their hair is so much processed with hairspray and stuff, so they're super shiny, you will see that it will kind of hit on some strands in the hair and make them kind of clumps of strands, which are what we are trying to kind of emulate in her hair. In this case, I'm actually going in with the E40 at last, and I'm actually coloring in her full hair with the E40s, or all the lighter parts of the hair. Try not to go over the dark too much, because every time you go over with a lighter over a dark, you will make the darker lighter in some shape or form, and sometimes that adds texture, which you sometimes want, and then you can experiment with it. But in this case, I didn't want to do that, so I was a little bit careful. Then I'm going in with my W00. Yes, the warm grey 00. And I'm doing a little bit of kind of figuring out where I want my shadows. And if you have looked at this, you'll see that I put my light source in the upper left corner. Kind of giving her a little bit a shadow on the lower right. Then I'm going in with as this is going to be white, there is a couple of things I'm thinking about. One is I don't want to go in too much with a darker color, because the more I add the dark gray, the more gray the kind of whites will look, and they end up being sort of gray anyhow right now, because I did end up adding a little bit too much of the gray. I got a little bit overzealous. That happens sometimes. Also, I'm using the uneven numbers of my grays for the simple reason that the ones I usually use, which is the even, has run out of ink. Actually, since recording this, which I recorded like a month ago, I actually have gotten a couple of refills for the W's, and also for my toner grays. And I got a new G82 because that one broke. The caps sometimes crack, and then the nib will dry up, and there's changing the nib won't change anything because of the cracked cap of the pen. But anyhow, to finish off my grey dress, I'm using the Colorless Blender. Now, the Colorless Blender is a little bit of a mysterious tool, and it's not... You'll learn how to work with it. I'll say it that way instead. You learn how to work with it. Because one thing, depending on paper, but this is Make It Crafty blending paper, and on that it actually will look grey until it dries. There are some papers where you won't see it, but on this paper you will actually see it as grey. But also you won't really see what is happening with the ink until a little while later, because it takes a little time for it to kind of disperse into the paper and then dry. So it will take a little while until you know what will happen. So in the beginning, when you're working with something like the Colorless Blender, you want to try a little, and then you want to wait until it dried, and then you try a little bit more. But when you, like me, have done Copic coloring for 3 years now, then you kind of know what the blender will do. So I usually just color in with the blender, and then it looks like it looks, because you know about how much you can use, but it takes time. Everything that is art takes practice and time, and they say you can master something when you have done it for 10,000 hours. That is a long time. That is a lot of time. So, but yeah. So then I'm just going in, I'm coloring in everything. I ended up actually not using the Colorless Blender on her wings, but they are kind of in the back, so they probably should have had even more dark gray to kind of make them pop from the dress. There's also a tip: contrast make things pop. So if you want something to look closer to you than something else, you want the thing that is further away to be A, darker, or B, and usually a little bit kind of towards the more grayish tones. The further something is away, the less saturated, the less amount of kind of color there will be in it. But yeah, that's just a side note. Doesn't really have so much to do with this little angel. For my final kind of coloring, this is actually the final color I use in this project, and it's green. I found this green color combination that I just fell in love with, and I just have to color basically everything with it. So this is G24 as the darkest. It's actually not that dark. And then I'm going in with G43 and then G40. And I really like this color scheme. This is actually one of the first kind of color scheme I bought, except for the 24, because I think I got the G46 with it. Then I wasn't that keen on it. I was all about the bright colors, and this is not a bright color. So I don't know. Now I really, really love it though. Really, really love it. So what I'm doing here is, one, I'm trying to think about those kind of ribbony things like hair strands, and also that the kind of shadows are coming from the middle part of the rosette or ribbony thing. Yes. In Swedish we call it rosette. So I'm sorry. It's starting to get a little bit late, but that's okay. Then I'm gonna go in. Yeah, you see that. I missed to cut that out. To finish it off all, I'm going to fill in the dots with a green. However, I realized pretty fast going in with the G40 that it was way too light. So I'm going in with the G43, which is my mid color and basically the color that I want my clothing to look like. Very good point there to think about. When you are choosing colors, the mid color should be the color that you are after to represent. And due to already have colored in grey, I actually don't have to shadow the dots because they're automatic shadowed by the grey. But yeah, that was the real-time coloring part of My Little Angel. I hope you liked it. If you do, please thumbs it up. It means a lot to me. If you have any questions, just comment down below. Down below is a list of all the Copics used and links to yesterday's video where I created the card. Here are 2 other videos that I done with coloring and card making. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye!